All right, good evening, everyone. I'm Trey Thompson. I'm a farm bill biologist up in the northwest part of the state, kind of in the Quad Cities area. And I'm presenting tonight with Kat Krudinsky.
Hey there. Yeah, I'm Catherine Krudinsky. I kind of am right around the St. Louis Metro East area, from, Greene County, Calhoun County, down to Monroe and St. Clair and everything in between.
Yep, and tonight we'll be going over some of the more common invasive plant species that we see across the state, especially in our areas. And we'll be covering how effective fire can be as a management tool, as well as what chemicals are best or most effective against them, and then some common identifiable characteristics. So to start with the basics, an invasive species is any species that did not evolve in the environment with the surrounding community that also outcompetes and displaces native species. Invasive species will move aggressively into habitat and monopolize resources like light, nutrients, water, and space, all to the detriment of other species. And invasive plants have the potential to eliminate other plant species from an area and to displace wildlife. There are four main methods of control when it comes to invasive species. There's mechanical control, which is going to be hand pulling, mowing, and solarization. Chemical control, which is herbicide. Biological control, and then cultural control, which is like prescribed fire and prescribed grazing. And you'll probably hear this a lot throughout the presentation, but to get ahead of your invasive infestation, the usage of each method will need to be repeated multiple times across consecutive years. One burn or one round of herbicide likely will not be enough to completely eradicate your infestation. The goal of multiple trials is to eventually exhaust the seed bank.
So when it comes to fire on our landscape, it's actually super interesting. All of our ecosystems really here in Illinois, apart from some very small, very wet areas, are all prone to fire and have that ecology. So really, it all started by indigenous peoples just viewing different natural fires happening, whether that is caused by lightning or anything else happening. And they saw the benefits of that. When you have all this new growth coming up in certain areas, because, that black soil absorbs a lot of sun, it actually will stimulate growth earlier on. So you'll have a little bit more forage in the early spring, and that's good for hunting. It's good for gathering certain materials, and they would even burn out around their homes during the kind of fall area. So that way, when the lightning comes, or if they're burning later on in kind of the spring, they won't have that fuel surrounding their dwellings. So it's really kind of cool how they use that. And really, the indigenous peoples of this area, and really the whole United States, they were the main source of ignitions for thousands of years leading up to European settlement. And then after the initial wave of European settlement, that has drastically decreased. We're finally getting back to that, with prescribed fire as much as possible. But we still have a long way to go. So this is a really cool tool. It covers a lot of acreage, but it's not a fix-all. So you do have to make sure that you know what you're doing with it, and even kind of get help from some local prescribed burn associations.
So herbicide can be a very effective management tool, but with so many chemical types available, you need to know which one is best suited for your specific problem. So one way to break it up would be to break up herbicides would be selectives versus non-selectives. So selective meaning it targets a specific type of vegetation. So there are grass selective herbicides like clethodim, there's broadleaf selectives like triclopyr, and then there'll be non-selectives like glyphosate. There are also aquatic safe herbicides like Aquastar. And the selection of the appropriate chemical would depend on your target vegetation, whether it's herbaceous or woody, or and the surrounding areas. So it'll depend on the presence of the desirable vegetation nearby that you want left unharmed. and then any potential for that runoff to reach a nearby water source. And once you've narrowed that down, the method of application can be decided whether you want to foliar spray, cut stump, or basal bark.
So some common herbicides that you might hear us using are just going to be kind of gone over right now, just so we have a base level of what we're working with. Trey, do you want to click? Thank you. So the main thing that you're going to be using for most of this stuff is going to be glyphosate. Now, you might know this as Roundup or Rodeo, Ranger Pro. It's under so many different trade names, it's not even funny. And that's kind of true for a lot of these, but especially with glyphosate. Now, glyphosate is a general herbicide, so it is non-selective. It will kill everything that it touches. However, it doesn't really stay in the soil very long. So it's actually kind of the preferred thing to use in especially kind of natural areas or things that we want to keep as pristine as possible. It's also readily available at your farm and home or tractor supply store usually, and it's fairly safe compared to a lot of other things that are out there, just in terms of human interaction with it. Of course, that does not mean that it is safe. It is just safer than others, right? So you have to make sure you know what you're doing when you use it. Triclopyr is going to be another one. This comes in a variety of different kind of types. What you'll usually be using is either Triclopyr 3 or Triclopyr 4. Now that is really just saying one is more of an oil-based and one is not. So the Triclopyr 3, the amine, that one you're going to be mixing with water. It is a selective herbicide. All of the Garlons are, or the Triclopyrs. Those are going to be broadleaf selectives. So really good for most of your trees, woodies, and also more like herbaceous stuff. But if you're using it for basal barking, let's say, then you want to use the Triclopyr 4, where it actually has an oil base. And that way it'll actually sink into that bark. So whatever you're using it for, just make sure you're using it in the correct way and make sure you're using the right mix for it. Now, this Triclopyr 3 does appear to be less harmful on aquatic ecosystems. It is not a water-safe herbicide, but if you're kind of close to water, Garlon 3A is going to be a better option than using like a Garlon 4, which is going to be a lot worse because it's at higher concentrations for those aquatic systems. Another one that you're going to be kind of seeing a lot is this clethodim. So this is one of our grass-specific herbicides. It's used to control any sort of annual or perennial grass and is usually the one that you're going to be finding in your farm and home stores.
So here are the three main application methods for herbicide. Foliar spraying is just applying chemical directly to the leaf surface. This is an efficient method of covering large areas, but it carries a greater risk of the chemical running off to any nearby vegetation that you didn't intend to spray. Cut stump treatments are more specific applications, but it takes more work to cut the plant, but it does have less risk of harming any nearby vegetation. And in this method, the chemical must be applied within a few minutes of cutting the stump for it to be most effective. And then basal bark applications is a kind of like what Kat mentioned, it's a chemical and oil mixture that's sprayed onto the entire circumference of the bottom 12 inches of the targeted plant stems. Herbicides and oil can penetrate the thin bark of smaller trees and shrubs, and it's mostly effective on vegetation that has a diameter of at least 6 inches. Many herbicides will have surfactants already mixed in with them, so be sure to check your label for the presence of surfactants before mixing in more. And from this point forward, we're going to be covering each of these species individually, and we'll go over how effective fire can be as a management option, the types of chemicals that are most effective against them, and then some common identifiable characteristics of each.
We did also want to just kind of throw in some honorable mentions. So we won't be going over these in detail here, but you might be running into these as issues on your property. So eastern red cedars, sugar maples, cattails, Canada goldenrod, all of these are native species. However, they tend to become quite aggressive in areas that historically they really wouldn't have as much of a presence. And that really is down to, for the most part, lack of fire or lack of diversity. So, in the terms of like cattails, they do serve a purpose. You know, they create kind of more of those like terrestrial ecosystems from the wetlands, because wetlands are typically not permanent throughout history. However, with the decline of wetlands, we do want to keep those open as much as possible, especially when we build them, right? And we don't have enough vegetation usually in those areas anymore due to a number of reasons, especially invasive species that we've seen, that the cattails have really exploded. You know, cedars you'll see a lot in your prairies. If you have any sort of CRP right around like a glade or some forested areas, you might see some cedars. These are especially prevalent in our hill prairies, in our natural hill prairies along that bluff corridor down here in like southern Illinois. Maples are also going to be a big deal if anyone has forested property. Usually, once you stop having fire on the landscape and you have all of these invasives in here that have thinner leaves and decay a lot faster, it actually changes the chemistry of your soil and makes it more moist, allowing these maples, which are a mesic species, to colonize more upland habitat that would have been drier. And then Canada goldenrod, anyone who has some CRP knows that that goes crazy. You'll see that really, really out and proud in the fall.
So the first invasive I'm going to cover is common buckthorn. It's native to Europe and West Asia and can grow up to 25 feet high. It's a shrubby tree with many branches. It has alternate leaf structures, you can see in that top right photo, with serrated edges on an egg-shaped leaf. It produces these small black fruits from August to September. And in the bottom right picture, you can see the bark is thin, or it's smooth, and it has these narrow white horizontal lines. So dormant season burns on a 1 to 2 year regimen can limit woody encroachment, but it will also increase native grass density and reduce forb abundance. However, less frequent dormant season burns will only top kill woody plants, allowing for resprouts. So burning from August to October tends to be more effective at controlling woody vegetation encroachment more so than dormant burns. So if you're going to burn for management for woody species, you'll want to shoot for that August to October timeframe. And burning is effective at keeping new growth out, but already established growth will likely need to be sprayed as well. So an effective strategy would be to use both prescribed fire and herbicide applications. A selective herbicide for buckthorn would be triclopyr, and a non-selective would be glyphosate. Next one, multiflora rose. It was previously cultivated for erosion control and to act as a living fence. It's native to East Asia. It's a medium-sized shrub with growth that spreads across the ground, forming these really dense thickets. It produces white flowers and small red fruits. The leaves are alternate with toothed edges and thorns. This plant has a lot of thorns. Again, a regular prescribed burn routine will be effective at repelling invasion and establishment, much like for common buckthorn. Cut stump treatment is also effective, but it may not always be feasible depending on how thick the infestation is. And the herbicide for a cut stump application would be similar to common buckthorn, so triclopyr or glyphosate. Chemical for foliar applications could be fosamine, which targets woody species, or dicamba, which is selective against broadleaf plants. And again, foliar applications versus a cut stump application will depend on the state of the surrounding area. So if there's any concern for damaging nearby vegetation, you should probably avoid foliar applications and then instead just cut it down to the stump. Most results are seen when chemical is applied while the plant is actively growing, so from May to September. So an effective strategy could be to spray between May and September, wait a little bit for things to dry out, burn it, wait a little bit for some regrowth, and then spray it again. Reed canary grass, it's a cool season perennial wetland grass. It's native to Europe and Asia. Its most identifiable characteristic is going to be in this top picture. It has a transparent ligule, which is this thin membrane between the blade and the stem. This grass also has hairless stems with leaves that end in a gradual taper, and it can grow up to 7 feet tall. Burning can be used as a pre-treatment prior to herbicide application to clear thatch and to stimulate new growth, because herbicide will be more effective when it's used on vegetation that is actively growing. You could foliar apply glyphosate in the early spring before your natives start to grow in, because early spring is best because reed canary grass will begin growing earlier in the season than your native species. And if you're going to be reapplying herbicide following a previous spray, or if you're spraying regrowth after a prescribed burn, you want to allow that regrowth to reach a height of 12 to 18 inches before applying herbicide again. And burning in 2 to 3 year rotations will likely be needed to see a reduction in its presence. And late spring or late fall burns are typically the most effective. And a couple of grass selective herbicides could be clethodim or fluazephat. Both of these are post-emergences that are safe on broadleaves. And then non-selective is glyphosate. Autumn olive is a multi-stem shrub that can grow up to 20 feet tall. It's native to Eastern Asia and was introduced in America in the 1830s. It has these alternately arranged leaves that are oval or lance-shaped and have wavy margins. And probably the most identifiable characteristic is going to be the underside of the leaves. It's going to be a really bright, white, shiny, almost like silvery color on the underside. It's a stark contrast from the dark green of the upper side of the leaf. And it also produces these small red fruits. Cut stump is most effective in the late growing season, so July to September, but it's also effective all throughout the dormant season. And similarly to controlling the invasion of most other woody species, having a consistent regimen of growing season burns, so every 2 to 3 years, can be most effective for preventing their establishment. And depending on the size of the shrub, foliar applications may not be feasible since this can get up to 20 feet tall. Cut stump or basal bark applications will likely be the best treatment option. And autumn olive does have a lot of stems, so be sure to cover them all for the most effective treatment. Some selective herbicides would be triclopyr or picloram. And I wasn't aware of this until after talking with Kat, but glyphosate has not shown to be very effective against autumn olive, so I would just stick to the triclopyr on this one. Garlic mustard is native to Europe, and it was brought over to North America in the 1800s as a culinary herb. And it has a characteristic garlic odor from all parts of the plant. It typically grows in densely across forest floors, and it frequents upland and floodplain forests, as well as savannas and roadsides. Each plant has multiple small 4-petaled white flowers that bloom in May. Small populations can be hand-pulled, and annual burns can help eliminate infestations. You could also foliar spray with glyphosate in the fall or early spring, or you could alternatively spray it with a broadly selective herbicide like 2,4-D. However, if you do choose to hand pull or cut this plant after those flowers have opened, you will need to completely remove this plant from the area because the seeds can still produce from this flower. And again, all management practices, you'll want to repeat them each year until the seed bank has been exhausted. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Kat so she can talk to you about bush honeysuckle.
Yeah, so this one is probably one of the main ones that you guys are here to hear about. So bush honeysuckle, almost everyone knows what it looks like at this point. It has invaded basically every square inch of the eastern United States at some level. You'll notice, especially in the winter, or if you get really up close to it, you'll actually see some striations on the trunk. It looks like little stripes, and that's super, super distinctive and really a good way to identify this going in to try and maybe like cut stump during the winter. But of course, this is also from Asia, along with Japanese honeysuckle, which is a vining cousin. But you can use kind of the same approach on it as you do with bush honeysuckle, especially when it comes to the foliar spray. You can hand pull young sprouts, or even kind of like yearlings. You can probably get either like an extractigator or a polar bear there. You do have to be careful because you don't want to cause too much soil disturbance. But if you're someone who doesn't really want to use a lot of chemical and has the ability to do that, as well as the the labor intensity of it, go ahead and just rip those out. The roots of it are actually very, very shallow. So when it comes to fire, honestly, I would not even think much about putting a burn on your property with a big infestation. I would tell you to get your infestation under control first, because fire doesn't really move through there very well. If it's just really young stuff, yeah, it can definitely help you uh, get those out, and they won't establish as well. But if you have a full blown infestation with mature bushes, unfortunately, it's just not going to help you very much. You need to make sure to get on. Usually, a chemical spray for an infestation that big is just fine. You can do a foliar spray with glyphosate, is really what you want to use on that. Triclopyr does not have as much of an effect. You might see it drop leaves, but it will tend to come back, kind of the opposite of that autumn olive. You'll also notice that it has those really bright red berries. They come in clusters of four, and they will kind of appear in the fall. The flowers are very, very distinctive with a white and yellow appearance and very, very fragrant. So if anyone has like plucked a flower and tried to suck out some of the sap, you know what I mean. Very fragrant, very, very delicious. Definitely try to eat some flowers if you're going to kill them anyway. They're great. Um, and you can really tell a lot by the arching form of it too. Kind of like hedge trees, but a lot shorter and has those stripes on the trunk. They'll really arch over like that. The next one is going to be burning bush or winged euonymus. So this one is going to be pretty distinctive in the fact that it has these quirky protrusions on it. And you'll see this kind of everywhere in urban environments. It's really well used for ornamental or aesthetic purposes. Really, you can cut stump treat it with glyphosate or triclopyr. I would tell you to probably focus on the triclopyr for this one, but either one will work. And we do have a native euonymus that is a bush. So just make sure that you're looking for those quirky protrusions there, because they're not going to be exactly the same, but that's really going to be the main indicator of if you have the invasive versus the native euonymus. And this is unlikely to be controlled with burning alone. Kind of the same deal that you'll see with a lot of these. If you have a heavy infestation, burning's not going to help you until you have gotten that under control. You can move on. Tree of Heaven is another kind of urban pest. This one actually does look a lot like sumac, which is another native kind of aggressive species that we have, especially in our prairies. However, there is one surefire way to kind of deal with this, or identify it at least, is pluck off one of those leaves and sniff it. It smells like rotten peanuts, like straight up. It is the most horrific smell that you will probably smell that day. Very, very pungent, but has those, we call it pinnately compound, which means that it looks like a feather. So a lot of leaflets on one leaf stem. Look, it's a very, very fast grower. And kind of to talk to you about that, do not cut it down. So you do not want to try to cut stump this because it'll actually send out a lot more suckers. You will not be able to really kill it that way. What can be done is a hack and squirt method, where it doesn't kind of send up those suckers immediately. It really kind of draws that down into the roots, killing it there, which hack and squirt is another method that we didn't go over. But for this one in particular, would be very, very helpful. And that way, you just, for every 2 inches, you want to put a hatchet mark in the tree, kind of pointed down, and then squirt in your chemical. And I would use a Garlon 4 with an oil carrier such as diesel or crop oil for that. For smaller ones, definitely foliar spray it. Like, don't worry about it, just go with foliar. But for those really big ones, just make sure you don't cut it down. The leaf also, and if you don't want to smell it, or you can't smell it for some reason, you can look for the thumb on the leaf. Because when you look at it, you'll have the leaflet kind of coming up here, then there'll just be a little notch to the side. Super easy to see. Winter creeper is going to be one that we really find in our forest. This really likes kind of shady areas. It's a very waxy leaf, and it does not burn very well because of that waxiness. And this is actually another euonymus. And really, when you see the berries, that's when you can definitely tell. These also turn bright red, just like that burning bush does, that we talked about in a few slides ago. One thing with this one, too, is it doesn't actually berry unless it is high up getting sunlight. So if you keep it off of trees, fences, things like that, it won't actually berry, which is great because then it's easier to get it under control. And you can just kind of foliar spray that with either glyphosate or with triclopyr. I tend to like using a triclopyr 3 for that, but glyphosate is also another option. And it will form a blanket. So really, nothing can grow underneath this once it has been established. It is very, very choking. Japanese hops is another one of those kind of vining plants. Although this is really going to affect more open areas and near water. The seeds actually get transported within creeks and streams. And so you'll find it coming up from that water a lot. A pre-emergent is really nice if you know that it is there. Use a pre-emergent during the very early spring, and you can kind of knock that back. This is another one that gets very, very dense and nothing can really grow beneath it. You can use triclopyr, glyphosate, kind of really a lot of different options there. But triclopyr definitely works. If you have other vegetation there, other grasses maybe that can establish in its place, that would be preferred. However, glyphosate, it does an awesome job if you have a super thick infestation that nothing's growing around it. You can also pool or dig out the roots. If you're pooling it, you definitely want to wear gloves. It is very, very prickly, very abrasive, and it does not really react to fire. it actually will increase its growth during immediately after or in the next season. So definitely don't do fire unless that infestation has gotten under control. And it is a true hop. So if you see anything that looks like a hop seed, which I'm sure that you can go to any sort of brewery and see what that looks like, that's a good way of telling. It is also very, very bright green and has those kind of palm-like leaves. So you really want to look at that too. Kudzu is one that is increasingly becoming a problem. It has really wreaked havoc down south in like Georgia and in the southeastern United States, but has definitely come up here. I actually dealt with a infestation near Godfrey, Illinois, just on the other side of St. Louis, and it is nasty stuff. So you really want to make sure to be on that. You can't use a lot of herbicides on this because honestly, they're not strong enough. Anything that you can get as a layperson, it's pretty not good. Really, like 2,4-D and picloram is really going to be able to kill it. It has to be very, very harsh. You have to wear all of your personal protective gear, including a respirator, whenever you use these. And that is if you want any sort of true control of it. Glyphosate, I mean, it's safer and it's better than nothing, but it's not going to really make a dent unless you are really, really on it. So if you are going to take the time and the effort to be out there, every few weeks really, to make sure that it is in fact dying, and every single year, I would try to go with a little bit of a stronger chemical on that. Don't try to burn it. It won't work. It'll just make it worse. But really, it really climbs the trees. It chokes them out completely. Whenever you look up pictures of kudzu, you'll actually see kind of blankets over power lines and trees 50 feet tall, where you can't even see the leaves of those trees anymore. So trying to burn that, even if it did catch, you'd just be in more trouble anyway. Stoat grass is another one that's going to be fairly common, at least down south where I am. I've seen this in hill prairies. I've seen this in river bottoms. It has really kind of gotten everywhere. It does create kind of a carpet. It's pretty low growing, usually not more than a foot, really usually less high. And you want to make sure that you are staying on this because of that carpeting effect, because it will choke out most of your native seed bank just because nothing's getting to it. You can hand pull if you have a small population. That actually works really, really well. Their roots are very shallow. They come up very easily. Just make sure that you stow them in like a trash bag, something like that, so they don't reroot. Same thing kind of with the garlic mustard, right? Now you can try to use fire. Well, sorry, you should not use fire on it because it does actually stimulate that growth. But you can spray it, you can hand pull it, and then try to run a fire through that afterwards to try to stimulate growth on native species. You also want to make sure to use this herbicide after or before the seeds are produced, because once the seeds are produced, it's going to go to seed. Those seeds are going to mature. So after that seed is produced, it's not going to work very well. But you're really going to notice that thick kind of silver line right in the middle of that leaf. is going to be your big indicator. That and the carpeting effects of it. You'll also notice that the leaf itself is kind of broader and shorter, because we do have a native grass called nimblewill that a lot of people get confused with it, but it's not going to have these kind of short, broad leaves, nor that kind of milky, silvery line right there. Serratia lespedeza. This is one that is going to be found in a lot of prairies. This has, and I think is currently used as forage for cattle, which is why it's in a lot of those prairies and those agricultural lands. And it can be a very pretty flower. It is in the pea family, so it has those really pretty kind of white flowers that look like a butterfly would really like to get in there, right? However, like a lot of these, it just goes a little bit too hard. We don't want it to take over the entire prairie, so we have to make sure to get rid of it when we can. A foliar spray of triclopyr and floxapyr, or like pasture guard, is probably the best way to deal with that. Really in like August-ish is when to do that. But you do have a little bit of leeway. Other triclopyr-based herbicides have been shown to have some success, but it's just that combination of the triclopyr and floxapyr is really where it's at with that. Mowing and pulling during the bud stage can control populations if you do it over and over and over again every year. But it is more labor intensive, and you will get it to decline eventually. It's just not going to be as effective early on. Kind of growing season burns, that sort of August, September time frame for burning, is going to show the best results. It tends to weaken the adult plants and destroys the flowers and the seeds. However, it will not necessarily kill the adult plants. So what I like to tell landowners is go ahead and do your foliar spray of your pasture guard. And then in the spring, you can go in and torch it. And that way, you get kind of a twofer on that. It's already weakened from the floxapyr and triclopyr mix, and then you get to go ahead and stimulate and weaken that, stimulate the native vegetation and weaken that plant, the Serratia, more in the spring. One surefire way to kind of recognize this, because we do actually have a native lespedeza as well, is look at the leaflet. They are small leaves, so I would just pick one up, kind of hold it up to the sky so it gets a little light behind it, and you'll see this really distinct herringbone pattern. So it looked like little arrows coming down the leaf. And that way you can distinguish it from our native, which does not have that pattern at all. That's more of a netted pattern. Go ahead. Last one that we're going to be talking about today is going to be teasel. I'm sure that you all, if you have any sort of agricultural land or have just been walking through a prairie somewhere, have seen some teasel. This really, you'll see the rosettes for the most part, and they're going to be very, very prickly, very green, very bright green, and have kind of stalks to them when they flower. So think of it as almost a cousin to thistle, where they're both very spiky. They both have those really, really long stems that go into the sky, but they're not quite the same plant. This, you can notice from the picture below, has more of a broad leaf to it, rather than a kind of dissected leaf pattern as the teasel does. Triclopyr during the growing season is going to be a really good way to try to get rid of that. Glyphosate will control it during the winter. Burning, it's not really going to do anything to it, but because it does grow so low, those rosettes are really, really low to the ground. and that's the best way to get rid of them anyway, a burn will make that really, really obvious. And it'll let you go through that field a lot easier than just trying to trudge through with a bunch of tall grass. So, right after a burn, go out there with some glyphosate. Or if you're kind of doing a growing season burn or kind of a later spring burn, go ahead and grab some triclopyr and just spray those.
So I highly suggest that you collaborate with your neighbors when it comes to this, because you can only be responsible for the invasive plants on your property. However, if you have invasives just on the other side of the fence or just in the other side of the property line, you'll likely continue to have more infestations spread onto your property. So it's just in everyone's best interest to work together on this. And leaving invasive species unchecked will eventually lead to overall habitat degradation by eliminating space, cover, and resources for both wildlife and native plants. And having a diverse ecosystem of an abundance of species is what makes it robust. Ecosystems of monocultural systems are less stable and more susceptible to things like diseases and even other invasive species. And once you get ahead of your invasive infestation, long-term prevention can be achieved through establishing native species in place of where the invasives once were and through consistent management. What just happened? Sorry about that. All right, sorry about that. So consistent management in the following years is a must, especially for prairie habitat types, because ecological disturbances like fire are necessary to maintain an early successional habitat type. And species like pheasant and quail are best suited for these early successional habitat types. It's brood-rearing habitat for them, and it attracts insects for them to feed on. A lack of management will enable woody vegetation to get established, and over time, the habitat type will transition into a later successional stage that's not ideal for upland bird species like pheasant and quail and for pollinators as well. So establishing native species over the area will not only shade out invasive species, making it more difficult for them to grow in, but it will provide quality wildlife habitat, which is our main goal here at PF and QF. I think at this point, we're going to open it up for questions. Thank you all for being here tonight. Hopefully you learned something.
All right. Thank you, Trey and Kat, for that presentation. Like Trey just said, we'll go ahead and open things for questions. You guys are welcome to go ahead and pop some questions into the question and answer icon down at the bottom. You see that one has like two little blurbs, and then there's also a chat box that you are welcome to utilize as well. Well, we've given it a few minutes for some questions to pop in. It looks like we haven't really had any filter in. I'll give you guys just maybe 1 or 2 quick minutes here. If not, we'll go ahead and wrap things up. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in tonight. As I had mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, this was recorded and we will be posting that to our YouTube page, and I will share that link with all registered participants tonight. So keep an eye out in your email that you registered with, and you will see an email here in the coming days with that. Again, if any questions do come to mind later on, I do encourage you to reach out to your local Farm Bill biologist. You can find your nearest Farm Bill biologist on our website, www.ihuntIL.com, on the Team Illinois tab, and our biologist contact information will be there, as well as their coverage areas. I want to thank you all again. Oh, okay, we do have a question that just popped in. One of our biologists want to take that one.
Hey, Jason. So you said that you have a brush hog that came in and mulched it. I'm assuming if this was done maybe like last year or sometime where it had some time to grow back, that you'll see resprouts. One thing that I really like to do, if you have a mulcher or something come in, is wait for those resprouts to happen and then come in with a backpack sprayer and just spray those resprouts as they go. You can try to do a cut stump on it, but how those brush hogs and those mulchers cut, where it's really jagged, tends to not take up the chemical as well. But if you wait for those resprouts to happen and just spray the leaves, you'll get a much better result.
All right, everyone. Thank you all again. Our next webinar will be on March 5th. That is a Tuesday, and it will be covering winter cover wild habitat for wildlife. So if you'd like to tune in, registration is now open for that. Thank you all very much. Thank you to our biologists, and have a good evening.